Hi, everybody. It's Debbie Aldrich. Welcome to the show. Here's our double header, and tonight I have our second guest and good friend, Lieutenant Colonel retired Sargis Sangari. Welcome back. How are you? Good to see you, and thank you for joining me tonight.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Debbie.
Got a little jet lag. You've recently returned from Korea, so we're going to talk about that and your trip and what you were doing in. Excuse me, I'm suffering from a little cold. I'll just let everybody know. So, so you just returned from Korea. So, what was going on in Korea? What took you over there?
Well, I went to Korea because with all the dysfunction that's taking place in Washington, you see the final result of it today. We knew that there was kind of a disengagement with what is happening in the Korean Peninsula. So, what I had done for the National Security Council a couple of years ago, I had looked at what the Chinese are doing with the uh, Rohingyas and actually Burma, how they're actually affecting the genocide of the Muslim populace there. And came back and gave a white paper to the National Security Council. First ones pointed out that there's a actual genocide taking place that is sponsored by China, pushed by their companies. And believe it or not, Huawei is a major factor there because they also have the infrastructure in Burma that they use for their advantage in targeting these individuals. Um, it was at the same time going back where on the Near East side, we had recommended that this unification will happen. This is even before the current POTUS had even considered that when we were still at odds with North Korea. And I was just trying to finalize my assessment, looking at what the nuances are currently. When I was there on 7 December, Kim Jong Un decided to test a major engine component for a ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, which now, given the fact that in October they had tested a launch off of a submarine platform, gives them the ability and the opportunity that they could, with a nuclear warhead placed on an ICBM, they could launch it from any submarine platform anywhere in the Pacific against any of the U.S. cities. That is at the same time that he made the decision to basically take the nuclear disarmament off of the discussion platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, the reason we have come to this point is one, because of what is happening, this dysfunction in DC, which really took away from what the president was doing as far as concentrating on these realities that we have to deal with. But at the same time, our ally, South Korea, President Moon, has been very much responsible for how we have gotten to this point because he is more inclined and, if not getting closer to the sphere of China and North Korea and his thought, but he might be actually there, which is the reason where we are today.
Yeah, it's really sad. I mean, I told you it's been a long time since I've been to Korea, but I've been to Seoul, and it's a big city. It's a has a great thriving, and it's had anyway a great thriving, economy as far as business and commerce there. There are a lot of goods are made there in South Korea. It would really be sad if, and we watched this, Moon has become, wants to get more cozy. I was telling you, it appears he's getting more cozy with Kim Jong Un. Does he not realize what would happen? I mean, he wants unification, but North Korea is far from being ready to unify. They're not. I mean, tell me if that's right or wrong. But
No, you're on point. I mean, the problem is that we have members of Congress here. As most of your viewers know, I'm actually running myself as a Republican in the 9th Congressional District of Illinois. And the incumbent here, a Democrat, Jan Shkasky, had in May taken a trip there. And they've been pushing for this Unification Now program, which is really pushed by these far left individuals that are tied to supporting Moon's agenda. Unfortunately, is
they're
just
basically Marxists.
they're Marxists, but it's haphazard as far as
Yeah.
their approach is concerned. I'll tell you some of the examples. When we set the parameters for much stricter restrictions when it came to squeezing China through this trade deal and ensuring that North Korea was squeezed. We brought them to the table. Well, Moon bypassed our restrictions or by opening up a liaison office on the DMZ and using it to tune of 50 major construction projects that allowed the transfer of technologies and support requirements, bypassing all the sanctions that we had put on North Korea. At the same time, when he did that, Japan was sending industrial chemicals to South Korea, and part of the reporting requirement for international monitoring was a reporting process by which we had to show that some of these industrial chemicals are dual uses, or they're used not just for industrial projects, but they're also used by our enemies for enhancing their chemical weapon capabilities. And there were 200 failures in the process. So when Japan realized that Moon was not returning their requirements and requests, they put South Korea on a ban list until they were able to get the answers they needed. Well, Moon threatened to sever the only security tie that the U.S. had worked on between Japan and South Korea. If it wasn't for the pressures we had put on Moon, he would have probably done so. These chemicals were being shipped north and were being used by North Korea to advance their abilities. And some of those abilities are ending up going to Iran, from Iran, going into many other Middle East nations, and are ending up on the doorsteps of Hezbollah. So these are the problems we were dealing with. And unfortunately, even the defectors from North Korea were being treated badly by Moon himself. Two sailors that had defected to South Korea were sent back on the request of North Korea without even putting him through, even if need be, a trial in South Korea. In doing so, Moon went against the constitution of South
Wow.
Korea, which in itself says that South Korea is the only legitimate state for the Korean people. So by
So no
sending
safe haven for people to escape.
no, there's no safe haven, and even a mother, North Korean mother, living in Seoul, who was a defector, committed suicide, killing herself because the social structures to support these defectors is not even there. So my recommendation was that to people in Congress, like the incumbent I'm running against, you're trying to push for this unification, but this has nothing about unification. There's a complete surrender of South Korea to North Korea under the North Korean demands. Even on the DMZ, as you know, that the Secretary of State Pompeo himself was actually livid when he realized that South Korea has began removing mines off of the DMZ. And there's no one who lives on the DMZ. I served on the DMZ.
Yeah, my
The,
father did too.
yeah,
He was actually in the Korean War years ago, and we had soldiers die, and Americans fought to. I mean, it was kind of a double edged sword. I think which president was it?
well, we served together. We
We
served
served together,
together.
right?
I mean, for 71 years we've served together. Koreans. When I was there serving in Korea, we had a soldier who lost his leg on a minefield there. It was a location he hadn't been, but still, that service in itself, where he was, where he lost his limbs. We had a Black Hawk helicopter at that time, which was shot down by the North Koreans. North Koreans served alongside with us in the Vietnam War, and the security guards that we had
Mm-hmm.
at my facility, we were on the other side of the MGM, the most forwardly deployed battalion in the U.S. Army at the time I served. Most of them were individuals who had served alongside American soldiers in Vietnam. So here you are, you're moving mines, which basically is putting those soldiers in jeopardy because you're removing the only obstacle that they have to defend themselves against the North Korean army marching down towards Seoul. Look,
And Kim Jong Un has not changed. He's
no,
still.
No, he hasn't changed. And
Dictator.
if you want to go even one step further, on the 71st anniversary of the establishment of South Korea, Moon in his entire statement never even mentioned South Korea. Imagine if the current POTUS or any president of the United States stands on stage on 4th of July and doesn't even mention America in his speech. So, the defense minister at basically said that maybe it's time for us to cozy up to China. The problem is, if that's the case, China has always looked at the Korean people as sub people. I don't want to say something else, and I think you know what I'm trying to get at. It's their viewpoint is that the Korean people are below them.
Well,
So
yeah.
what you're doing is you're basically turning over your country to individuals who believe that you should work for them, then that this is not an equal setting. Um,
Right. Well, it's kind of obvious that China feels that way. They feel that way about everybody, but particularly when you're thinking about North Korea, where Kim Jong Un is basically his errand boy. He does the China's bidding basically, and China as well as North Korea has all these concentration camps. For people. I mean, their human rights violations are horrendous. China just is lucky because they inherited Hong Kong, which brought them a plethora of wealth overnight, and so they have a big window dressing. So if Moon succeeds in this kind of moving toward unification, do you think there would be like a Hong Kong protest that would take place in Seoul because they're not used to being, the people that live in Seoul are used to having freedom.
Look, this is not unification. This is basically the leadership of uh, uh, Norway surrendering Norway to the Nazis. This is a surrender of South Korea to North Korea. And unfortunately, one of the things you mentioned, the economy, at the beginning of your talk, the economy of South Korea was built by the South Koreans. They did not steal
Mm-hmm.
intellectual property like the Chinese do. They didn't basically steal somebody else's information and make it their own. They build this. Their education level was very low, going back to the war, and most of their people were illiterate. They have been one of the strongest nations in the world when it comes to education. They are absolutely incredible. Their economy is number 5 in the world. They build LG, they build Samsung, they
Mm-hmm.
build all these major corporations out of nothing. They never bought those corporations. They build them internally themselves. And all this political capital that they build, Moon's about to destroy it. Why? Because he has to lower the economy of South Korea to a point where it has to work with North Korea and has to work under Chinese dominance. The problem you run into, like I mentioned, you have a North Korean mother who's committing suicide in Seoul, the
Mm-hmm.
5th largest economy in the world, which is Korea. If you can't take care of one mother, how are you going to take care of millions of individuals that are sitting in North Korea? And I think one of the problems that I recommended to the leadership in DC when I came back here and briefed them, and also have had that discussion with some key members in the South Korean structures. I said, look, you got to use this to your advantage because you're about to lose it. And the issue is when North and or East and West Germany united, really, West Germany was a very strong economy. East Germany was occupied by the Russians. So West Germany gobbled up East Germany, and it still has some issues.
Mm-hmm.
These are two completely different nations right now. The people have grown in two different ideological spheres. They do not match ideologically. They're two separate countries. And if you're going to have a weaker South Korea with a weaker economy, you're not going to be able to sustain. So unification, everybody wants it. But the way you approach it, and especially, unfortunately, like I said, even we have the congressional member in my district who's hoping that her visits to South Korea is going to be able to flip the votes for her during in the Korean community. It is doing it one for votes. Secondly, they're doing a shallow understanding of how this process should take place, and it's really detrimental overall. Now, in April of 2020, there's a South Korea will have its elections. If Moon gets 2/3 of the assembly, National Assembly, U.S. loses its capability of leveraging North Korea, who now has the abilities, if it wants to launch ballistic missiles off of submarine platforms
Mm,
against U.S. targets, and it will completely lose out to Russia, to China, who still sees Korea as a vassal
mm-hmm.
of North South Korea, and I think a South Korea with a strong economy that is not basically placating or surrendering itself to China and to North Korea will be in a much better position to help this unification process. So
So you think unification is inevitable?
I think it's a absolute shame that for 70 plus years the uh, Korean people had to be divided
Mm-hmm.
uh, for really no good reason from the perspective
And
of
then that sort of is America just I think got tired of fighting and just said we just can't enter. I mean we were part of the Korean War, but I think it's my understanding that at that particular time we were sort of burned out from wars and said we just can't continue doing this, and so the countries were divided. I don't know if that's kind of a summary or brushing over all the facts that went into that, but that's kind of what
it's
my
okay for
understanding.
a general perspective, Debbie. There's nothing wrong with it. I say, people talk about unification, and I
It
and
will be
there's a
difficult
great
because
war.
it was
Yeah,
difficult for the East Germans, and I've met some. I actually been through East Germany when the wall was still up, and I've since been to Germany and met some East Germans, and it was a big adjustment. It took a long time, the adjustment coming out of that, and I don't even think they had been behind the wall as long as now the
because people
Koreans.
are separate mindsets. Look, um, 90% of the South Korean economy is in the social sector, and a lot of the young talent is leaving. And the population is getting older. Just taking care of the South Korean population will be difficult. Uh, you want unification, but there's going to be processes, and there's going to be measured processes by which you get there. And I think what Moon is doing is absolutely something that even the military in South Korea is not happy with. And look, I truly believe that in the past that it has come. I always say to everybody, your past is a harbinger of your future, and I would not be surprised that in the future that folks that believe that what he is doing is really socialist against the democratic value of the people of South Korea, then they may actually take some steps. And what's funny about it is the people who initially called out Moon about it, um, who in their dialect and in their language, they basically said that he's an agent of North Korea, were the church leaders,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, "Look, this cannot work. This is absolutely gonna gut us." There's internal fights there, also politically, just like we have them here in our country. But I think that my recommendation would be, as I recommend in DC, that it's time for President Trump, the current POTUS, to come out and call Moon out for all these measures he's taken, and let the world community know that look, what he's doing is against our policy. Otherwise, he's gonna grab the National Assembly in 2020, and the dynamics right now of what I saw, the pressures of what we call atmospherics, as you know, working in the Pentagon, are not positive. And I don't think the people that built South Korea and have sacrificed, whether it be Americans or Koreans, are willing to allow him to be able to have that much power after the 2020 elections. You may see movement by individuals who have served in Korea that it would not be a positive really for Korea itself, but they may have no choice. So let's hope that he's called out on it. Let's hope that he takes steps and is much more measured in his approach as far as unification, and understands that unification at a cost of turning over and surrendering Korea to China is not the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some parallels between that and what's gone on in Hong Kong. And the thing is with South Korea, would Moon surrender his leadership, if there was a unification. I mean, has he even thought about that? Does he think he'd be heir apparent? Because certainly Kim Jong Un, who is the heir apparent of his family dynasty, is not going to give up any kind of leadership either. And so, what are all the ramifications there? Which wasn't an issue with Hong Kong, but China being involved in both of them in, taking a strong arm against Hong Kong, which was their money maker. That's what created the wealth that China is enjoying today from the get go, because China didn't have all that money prior to, taking Hong Kong back. And that's a real disappointment. What the heavy hand that they are supposed to operate with one country, two systems, and they're not honoring that, which was part of the deal in the UK giving back Hong Kong, which they probably shouldn't have done. So they should learn from that example. Like, China's going to come in. The values of North Korea, Kim Jong Un, obviously aren't the same. People are in concentration camps. And those in our government who are on the other side of the aisle should remember about Otto Warmbier and how that played out. And there's other people that have been uh, imprisoned in North Korea. And like you said, the women and many who have tried to escape. But it used to be that South Korea was a safe haven. Now it's not a safe haven. This is such a situation that could really blow up.
Yeah, look, I'll give you another example. When the Pope was making his trips to through Asia, Moon himself says that I'm a Catholic. Well, he was asked to make sure that Pope, on behalf of the Catholics, asked the North Koreans to at least release the captives that they took that were Japanese captives years ago, and he didn't even bother to bring it up to the Pope. I mean, at least as a religious person, there's nothing political about you asking the Pope to ask on behalf of the Japanese government that you have a security agreement with, which is really created by the Japanese. They have systems that allow us to better protect South Korea, which South Korea doesn't have that ability to have asked that. And he didn't even bother to ask the Pope to ask on behalf of those Japanese captives. Now, one thing that he's pushing for is what is called a blood and soil nationalism, but is a far left socialist nationalism. And he tries to use that when it comes to trying to divide the Korean people against others, to say, well, we have more of a unity with the North Korean people than we have with any other nation. But to use that to build a nation is one thing. To use it to destroy a nation is something else. So for us, when in this country people say, well, when you're a nationalistic, you're far right. For them, they're far left. It's kind of reverse in Asia as to where nationalism sits. And I don't think that's a positive either, because he's isolating himself from the global leaders that are nationalistic for their country, for the benefit of their country, not just nationalistic to say that I'm a different race of people than them, so I'm going to turn around, I'm going to destroy my economy, I'm not going to allow refugees, or I should say individuals who are escaping North Korea to remain here for me to take care of them. I'm going to send them back, and then allow China to come in, which eventually is going to steal your intellectual property. So what your people have worked on for 70 plus years, hard work, building this capacity, that now is basically what they have in their hands that they could use as credit to project themselves and support operations other places in the world. It would be tremendous, but you're destroying it. Look, Korea can become a very great friend for us when it comes to security requirements in the Middle East. The ambassador of the U.S. in Iraq, while I was there, just before I got there, stated that the reason people are not returning in Iraq is because of security requirements. Right now, China, North Korea, Iran, U.S., Russia, Europe, they're all fighting surrogate fights in the Middle East. The only ones who are not doing that are the Korean people. At least if that's the case, in this case, South Korean people, they're very much respected. They're capable. Their products are actually in the Middle East. They're all over Syria, Iraq, Turkey. Although I know geographically Turkey still falls under Europe, we consider part of the Middle East in our discussions. But there's not one Korean there to sponsor their products. And I think this way, if the Koreans are able to accept the um, requirements maybe from the US, they could be actually a tremendous partner for America in the Middle East, and they
Mm-hmm.
could become that basically calming voice for the region
Mm-hmm.
because they're seen neutral by all the parties that are bashing each other in the head using surrogates in the region. So Korea has a lot of potential. Unfortunately, the American leadership here in Congress currently, and one of them is the lady I'm running against, are dysfunctional at best, and they're they don't have a deep understanding of the possibility of what Korea has to offer to bring global peace. And if we do not help them use their talents to expand and be able to be a leader in this process of a unification and become nothing more than another equal to North Korea, then at the end, we're probably going to see a possibility of reversing it, and even maybe at the worst case scenario, heading towards a war in on the Korean Peninsula, which would be a absolute disaster for the Korean people.
Yeah, it's amazing how one leader, can change the direction of a country, whether good or bad. One thing I think some people, and especially the left, they pander to socialists and totalitarians and on dictators in a different way. But some people have accused our president Trump in meeting with Kim Jong Un, trying to push a dialogue, meeting with these other leaders as he is kind of in bed with them. They don't seem to understand that. I mean, there's no way Trump wants to be in bed with Kim Jong Un. What he wants is for Kim Jong Un not to continue with his horrific human rights violations and launch rockets into areas that could affect Americans, let alone our allies. And so the best way, his policies, part of the art of the deal, is you give a carrot and you hope you get something good out of it, to keep your enemies close and try to coat it with a little honey and maybe bring him into the 21st century on some level. But that's what his kind of philosophy is in negotiations, knowing that these guys don't think like Westerners do, but and that's why you don't negotiate with them in the same way. We don't want those rockets being launched anymore. That was a couple 3 years ago, was very tenuous for people living in the Philippines and in Japan and those areas where their rockets were reaching. And now with that technology and nuclear capability reaches Kim Jong Un's hands, where he already has it, I imagine. It makes the situation even more dangerous. Same thing with Iran. We've got the liberals that go over to Iran and play patty cake with the regime in Iran that has horrible human rights violations that, are pushing for nuclear capability, and they're funding, terrorist organizations in the Middle East and throughout the world, including Europe. I don't understand why this is not obvious to the
It's
other
not,
side of
yeah.
the aisle, and they
Yeah.
don't see this. This is the detriment to our country, to our democracy, republic, and to other nations that are allies.
Look, it's organizational dynamics. Okay, it's organizational dynamics that lead us to where we are today. And you know, when you have the POTUS having victories, and he's able to bring the North Koreans to the table, and the president said the number one threat to the United States is a nuclear North Korea. Well, now they have the ability to launch ICBMs off of submarine platforms against any American target. And if you put a nuclear warhead on it, there you go. And they don't have to launch it for North Korea. They could launch it for other countries if they want, whoever is the highest bidder. The problem you're running into is that instead of buttressing this type of a success. Um, Organizational dynamics in Senate lead one party, which right now is the Democratic Party, to spend time to try to impeach the president, which they did today. Congratulations! I mean, the enemy's testing the weapon systems, and you're over here impeaching a president, which is going to stay in. He's going to stay in place because the Senate's not going to.
Pass
This
it.
it's just not going to pass it. So what did you achieve in this process? Nothing. And then you got individuals that are
What they
from.
achieved is a legacy that Americans aren't going to forget.
Well,
That's
I
what they're
mean,
trying to
look,
do.
look, the enemy is not going to relax because you're dealing in this level of stupid. You know,
Right.
I mean, the enemy will come after you. The enemy will come to your southern borders. The
And they're
enemy
going to always look
will
for a
test
weak
your
spot, like something that's happening right now.
ICBMs. The enemy will use your system to try to break your apart. Look, there's a lot of this socialist ideology that you see today in America. Uh, the socialist governments in the world that were trying to beat us on the battlefield realize they can't do it. So 30 years ago, they started this process of, well, maybe we can try to get into their systems and see what we could do. A lot of people that are out there today that are promoting those concepts, unfortunately, it has fallen to the Democratic Party, which is right now the far socialist left that is trying to push these agendas. Some do it because they truly believe in it and they're following the agenda. Others are just have no concept that they're pushing an agenda that started 30 years ago. They're just part of the process because once you inject a virus into a organization, then organizational dynamics take hold. And it doesn't matter what you believe in, what your standards are, what your ethics are, the organization eventually overcomes it.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on how the system is set up, we get to a point right now where we have a current POTUS that came in under the executive branch, and he pushed back against the legislative branch. On paperwork, we say that we have a co-equal branches of government that never existed. We had one branch of government called the legislator that wrote the laws, and we had individuals who sat in their seats for 20 years. And the way they did it, once they got in and they sat in those seats, they gerrymandered the districts to choose who should vote for them. So I'm going to gerrymander the district this way in order for me to elect or select the voters that should vote for me. So now that I'm in, I'm going to now raise taxes on those people. The money comes into my coffers. I'm going to give myself a raise because I'm the legislator. I'm going to use their money that they gave me to build my purses so I can beat whoever is the person who's trying to challenge me in the future. That's why most of them go in and come out millionaires, and they have at a minimum $1 million sitting in their coffers to fight any challenge that comes along. And in the process, I'm going to write the rules in a way to make sure it's so difficult for whether to be an independent, a person
Mm-hmm.
from another party, or individuals that are even from my own party to run against me, because I can do it where I can pay for people to go out and so collect petition signatures for
Because
me,
yeah,
while the other person has to do it out of their pockets. So this way, I stay for 20 plus years, and if I ended up dying in office, I have already hand selected a family member who's going to take my seat, or I'm going to have my own crony through this dynamics of this machine to be selected to be put in place. Well, the socialists figured that out, and they said, well, okay, this is their system. Let's just work their own system at detriment to themselves. So what happens today with this impeachment process has nothing to do about President Trump. He could have been called even President Obama. But he was the one that who pushed back against the legislator. It was to set the stage for future that if I can break the ability of the executive to be able to do anything to push back against me in the future, because now the
mm-hmm.
standard of impeachment is so lowered that I can constantly be able to squeeze the executive. So I control the executive, I control the judiciary. Even if he's not beholden to me or she's not beholden sitting in the executive, they'll be basically not able to push back. And I don't know if you're going to get anybody else like the current POTUS will ever push back against the legislator. So now you have a system that is under control of the legislator that can pass whatever law it wants.
Mm-hmm.
You break down the mechanisms of this system that was
Well,
based on two-party system that is based on co-equal branches of government in the long run to do what? At the detriment of the United States in the long run.
and our democracy, and this is a good example of what we're seeing today play out as a result of people not showing up for midterms. If people had showed up for midterms, we might not have we wouldn't have lost as many seats. So we have to be very diligent in this next election coming up in 2020 that we go and vote. And at this particular time, folks, if you really want to save our republic, our democracy, liberties and freedoms, you better just hit Republican straight down, because the Democrats at this point are so far gone. You know what's interesting to me, they pander to Iran, they pander to these countries, and then they come and accuse Trump as being an agent with Russia, in bed with Russia. Yet they're John Kerry has made multiple trips to Iran, to work behind deals while Trump is president. Trying to say, don't worry about the JCPOA, it's not going anywhere. Well, no, it's gone. It is gone, and it's a done deal. And what's interesting, the Democrats have forgotten so quickly, and like you said, they're supporting this possible unification. We don't see Democrats really coming out against the Hong Kong protest and things like that. And yet, their hero of the Democratic Party, their poster boy of the Democratic Party, JFK, they have a short-term memory of their history of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And yet, who sold uranium to Russia? But Trump is in bed with Russia. But who sold our uranium? It's such a convoluted, crazy mess because the Democrats are so far off the reservation.
Well, look, the party is dysfunctional. Unfortunately, the people are in the party that are not that dysfunctional are stuck with it. I truly believe that this nation needs two parties to operate, because one party is a dictatorship. So I'm not happy about it. And look what's going to happen.
I agree with you. It's just this party's gone off the rails. The other one.
I'm a Republican. I'm running as a Republican, and it's possible that come the 2020 election, the House and the Senate might be in the hands of the Republicans to include the presidency. As much as I'll be happy I'm in office, it's still not good for our democracy. The problem is the current leadership in the Democratic Party is far left socialist. It doesn't care about this concept of two parties are good for this nation. So just like you said, my recommendation has been for the Democrats here who met with me. I'm like, look, listen, you got to vote these people out. These incumbents that I'm mentioning, the one I'm running against, you got to vote these people out, these 20-year folks, because they will never, on both sides, Republican, Democrat, will never put term limits for themselves through Congress. Mm-hmm. They will never do it. It is a cash cow for them. Why would they do that? But vote them out, at least stop the dysfunction of the socialist ideology that has been infused as virus in the Democratic Party. Look, by 2022, work on finding capable adults to put in your Democratic Party to run for office. And I got to tell you, if a young colonel, a female, male, that comes in 2020 on the Democratic side and is running and is capable, even a guy like me who's a Republican, I would say, okay, if they're capable, God bless, good for the nation. I would even join you if you give me a capable person in my congressional district to vote for them. But these individuals who are the dictators of the Middle East, literally, this is what I escaped from, that stay in power for 20 years. Once they're dead, I got to get up and clap for them because they died in office, holding to debt grips, and then put their sons in place. Today, the Congresswoman Jan Shkasky stood on stage, said that it was my son, my adult son, who had to remind me of my duty. That's why I decided, or my responsibility, I'm sorry. That's why I decided to go ahead and vote for impeachment. Well, I'm an adult. My parents taught me responsibility, and I learned it in the U.S. military in combat leading troops. I don't need to have children to remind me of my responsibilities. You've been there 11 times for all these 20 years. And what is she doing in this process? She's basically building up her son so that if she ever gets off stage, now she's preparing him to come and take her seat. These type of dictatorships
Mm-hmm.
are not what our country needs. We need young, capable adults from both sides of the party to come in and be able to get us to a point where we could work center right, center left for the betterment of the United States. Otherwise, look, every nation in its history has been built and has fallen. There's not one nation on this planet that has ever been built and has had a tremendous lifetime achievement. It's been a good experiment for these 200 years plus, and I would like to see it go on. Because if this thing falls apart, frankly, from immigrant perspective, from an Assyrian whose family members had to initially escape from Iran into Iraq, from Iraq back into Iran. Some had to escape to Russia. Some had to escape to Syria. Some had to escape to Lebanon. Then came here. Where am I going to escape from here if this thing falls
Yeah,
apart?
there's no place to
I
go.
mean, take
Europe's
care
a
of them.
mess. I mean, there's really no place to go. Find an island somewhere. China might find you though. So yeah,
Well, there's one island. It's called Israel. It's
yeah,
enough.
yeah, exactly.
It's functioning. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to destroy his economy.
Yeah,
And we're allowing weapons or technologies to bypass through the Korean Peninsula into North Korea. That turns around and gives those to the Middle East countries that are targeting Israel. Uh, it's unfortunately it's the only game in town, so
yeah,
we have to play the game. But it would be nice if we can get some adults in the room to try to right the ship. And I think the most detrimental thing to us is politicians who sit in their seats for 20 plus years, and we gotta correct this. If we correct it through a congressional
mm,
through an amendment process, which is probably not going to be pushed through Congress, it's going to come through a different process. I think if the states actually push for it, then we could at least get rid of we could break up this pinata that the Russians and all these other socialists built 30 years ago to try to destroy our democracy. It gives us leverage and breathing room with term
mm,
limits that now brings us back to a co-equal branches of government with two viable, capable parties, citizenry that comes in and serves for a short period of time in support of American needs rather than individual party needs. And these group dynamics are broken up a little bit.
right.
It's just to restructure the system. If not, we're done for.
Yeah, we got to write this shit for sure. Bring us up to date really quick before our time's up on what is going on in Syria and Iraq right now. We're pulling out some more soldiers out of Afghanistan. We're gonna bring it from 15 down to 15. Was it 1,000 down to 8? I think. But what is happening right now? The news has been so absorbed into this impeachment thing. Trump keeps trying to keep on working and talking about the economy and making deals and everything. But what is the current situation there?
Well, we're squeezed the Iran. We squeezed them enough that they're willing to negotiate now. How do they negotiate?
Yeah, they recently let what is it, that professor out,
Yeah, and
and that's
actually,
a Trump because of Trump, isn't it?
yes,
Getting
and
their squeeze.
actually, the government spokesman came in and said we're willing to release everybody else. So what does that mean? That we're negotiating, but people have to understand that. And what is happening throughout the Middle East? In Lebanon, the people are in the street against the Iranian government. In Iraq, people are dying to the tune of hundreds in the street because they're against the government corruption that's tied to Iran. And in Iran, they're being killed.
Oh
They
yeah,
actually have BMPs, which are
almost
personal
slaughtered. They're
that
almost
are machine
slaughtering.
gunning people in Iran. So everybody has risen against Iran's ideology. And I think this is the first time the Iranian government, believe it or not, has said we might have to relook at our systems, which is incredible to get them to that level. Unfortunately, when it comes to Syria too, our so-called allies, again, I hate to pile on the Sunni Muslim Kurds, but they just never quit. They're always constantly causing trouble. Um, Recently, right after the reality set in that it's possible that the Iraqi government may implode internally with the prime minister resigning, who was supported by the Kurds because they were able to hide how much oil revenues they were stealing without it being public to the Iraqi government. As soon as he was removed from office, and as soon as the POTUS made the decision that, look, we are going to stand by what Turkey is doing, the first thing Adam Schiff did, he pushed for the recognition of the Armenian Genocide resolution. He didn't do it because he cares about the Armenians. If that was the case, he could have done it years ago. One was to solidify his base. Mm-hmm. There's a large Armenian base. Second was to punch the president in the face on foreign policy, because the president had sent the vice president and the secretary of state to give assurances and guarantees to Turkey that if Turkey worked within our parameters, that we would make sure that Congress did not do anything against them. So what does Adam Schiff do and the Democratic Party? They pass a non-binding, non-concurrent, simple resolution, which to the Armenian people, they thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But as you know, that document, when it's simple, non-binding, non-concurrent, means nothing. Placing the Senate in a bad position. Senate recently also passed their version of it, non-binding, non-concurrent, which means 100 years of the Armenian Genocide, where they wanted to finally get some resolution to this, really was used, marginalized by individuals who just want to stay in power maybe for another couple of years in their district, and put us in a bad position to where even the president had to come on and say that, you know what, I'm not going to support it. Now, how is this related and tied to the Kurds? Well, UAE met with the Kurdish leadership, with Saudi Arabia. What has been reported is that at least 3 large aircrafts or weapon systems were transported to Kurdish regional government area after that meeting. And those weapons are going to go 3 places. One, they're going to be used by the Kurds in north to fight against the Iraqi government, which causes more turmoil and the destruction of that government. 2, they'll be sent to Iran to be used by Kurds against the Iranian government. Or 3, and worst of all, they will be sent to their Kurds that are tied to Syrian oppositions, and in this case, pulling Turkey into a larger fight. And by doing so, really giving an opportunity for the dysfunctional people in our government here to say, look, the U.S. strategy that Trump had in Syria has not worked. So we have gotten so dysfunctional in Washington that we are willing to allow the transfer of these type of weapon systems, these technologies, under the full understanding of what's happening by members that sit on the Intelligence Committee in Congress, pushing these type of non-binding resolutions just to squeeze Turkey, to allow the failure of U.S. policy in Syria at the detriment of what? United States overall. Just so somebody can say, you see, the president's current approach to the Middle East doesn't work, vote for me, and vote for whoever I decide to hand select to be the nominee of our party going forward in 2020.
A lot there, a lot going on, yeah. And, do you have a Twitter page for your campaign?
Yes, the Twitter page for the campaign is Vote Sangari, actually.
Okay, that's why I couldn't find it. I was looking for just your name. So it's Vote.
No. Vote Sangari is a site they can go to, and right now we're building our ability to be able to counter any type of election fraud by scheduling some training for poll watchers. Mm-hmm. Which is going to be important for us through the primary. Of course, fundraising is big for us. Without money, you can't fight the incumbents.
Yeah, that is the truth. Yeah.
And we're going to try our best to do what we can. Like I said, I hope that the Democratic people, the people who vote Democratic for the Democratic Party, realize that they're about to lose their party. Mm-hmm. And it's not good for America for us to have a absolutely dysfunctional Democratic Party, and I'm not Republican. We need two parties, folks, for this system to work. But we need two functional parties for this system to work. And the best way to do it, my recommendation would be, like you said, go in this election and just vote out these incumbents, literally break up this machine that is a
It
socialist
needs
left.
to be a wake up call. It needs to
Yeah.
be a big wake up call.
And even like,
Like just Boris Johnson just won, and that's been a wake up call, I think, for the UK. That finally, after all these years, they might actually see Brexit, and we need that wake up call. Trump was a wake up call, but what it did, it not only engaged and spirited his base, which has grown, but it made the Democrats go even further left and such vitriol and disdain for him. And we need to come back to center. And the only way to do
yeah,
that is a wake up call in 2020.
you got to vote them out. Look, in 2 years, there's not one individual. If you vote out these incumbents that are 20 years in, there's not going to be, like, even here in Illinois, the Republican Party is not going to come in and establish these deep roots in 2 years. Vote out the bad Democrats. Colonel Sangari, God forbid, becomes your representative, guy who actually cares about America and is an immigrant, and he's served the nation in combat. We don't want those people in in the position of power who understand foreign policy. For 2 years, I'll save the ship for you. And by the way, I know as soon as I win, and because of the census, they're probably going to gerrymander the district anyway to be able to have their Democratic guy to run. But don't allow the machine to choose those folks. Go find yourself viable people. And look, if in 2 years a young Democrat who served in combat comes and runs against Colonel Sangari and beats me, God bless. At least I know I'm leaving the nation into the hands of a much better capable person than the people you have right now, who sit in office, die, and put their son in charge. This is nuts. We got to get away from this socialist
Somebody's
far left ideology and save our nation.
gentleman's asking me, is at Sangari underscore now I missed it. Do you have it at Sangari?
No, it's Vote Sangari is our Twitter page.
Okay, it's Vote Sangari. So there's one that says Sangari underscore Sangari.
Well, I have my own personal Twitter.
Okay.
I don't
Okay,
use
so that's
Near East, yeah. So
so that's not it. It is Vote Sangari, and that's there's no underscore or anything else, like it just says that, right?
well, the only one is on the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. Sometimes you have to put the underscore in there, or you can just type it out.
So
Near East
so you don't have a Twitter page of Vote Sangari, then you just have new. You
No,
do.
I do. I
You
do.
do.
But I'm
Okay.
saying underscore sometimes is related to the Near East, not to the Vote
The
Sangari.
vote. Okay. So no underscore with Vote Sangari. But
I mean, at Facebook, and I got a page. They could just put in there.
Are you on LinkedIn? I can't remember.
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn.
So we must follow each other on LinkedIn. I'm sure we do. If not, I'll check that out. But well, you can find him on Facebook, and you can find him on Twitter, Vote Sangari, which I have to look for myself. And of course, he's also the CEO of the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. So, which has great information on there, and you can also go to the webpage, and that's really where you should go, to the webpage, if you really want to get deeper into the stories and the situations and what's happening in that part of the world that affects us here. So really good stuff, and really interesting stuff of what's going on in Korea, South Korea, North Korea, and all the players, and it's like a game of chess, and who's gonna win that game. So really, that part was very fast. I mean, all of it's been fascinating, but really good information on that. We don't get a lot of information on Korea, what's going on there. So thank you for that insight and keeping us posted on that, because I mean, I could actually see Seoul erupting like, Hong Kong is. I just can't see the people in Seoul, the
They have
hardworking people.
protests, Debbie. Yeah, they were protesting when I was there.
Okay.
I don't know what stand the military will take
Yeah.
after April 2020, but they're just not happy, to be honest. So
Yeah, I can't see that they would be. Well, thank you so much. It's been great seeing you again and having you back on U.S. soil and catching up. And listen, folks, you got to get out there, check out Sangari's, Lieutenant Colonel Sangari's website, Vote Sangari, or Twitter page, Vote Sangari. Look for him on Facebook. He needs your help. We got to get good people with good experience and knowledge and what's happening in the world back into our Congress, back into our legislative our branch to right this ship. And Lieutenant Colonel Sangari would be a great one.
Sides.
On both sides. On both sides, absolutely. But right now we need the Republican vote. We need straight down the aisle. It needs to send a message to the Democrats. You've gone too far. You better right this ship, your own ship, your party, and bring us back to center so we can once again work together, reach across the aisle, and work as a country versus polarized. And right now we're so polarized. And, we want good Democratic people. I've voted. I never used to vote party ticket. And I have voted both ways because I've always looked at the candidate versus the party. But at this particular time,
Yeah.
it seems like we need to really send a
The
message.
adults in the room. Get the adults in the room. You have the children, you have the parents, and you have the adults. I tell folks, the parent is the one who stands there and dictates to you. The child is the one who either listens or talks back. You got to get the adults who says, "Look, okay, let me see the cards you have on the table. This is the only way you can go. That's it. Get the adults in the room and let's get this thing moving in the right direction. Otherwise, I build my future, for God's sakes, as an immigrant in this country. I have deep roots. My dad is buried down the street from me. He didn't come here, leave millions of American dollars on the table in Iran, turn over his lands to the churches, work as a security guard in a candle factory while he was a physics professor to educate me. And the last thing he passed on that I took off of his lapel pin was an Syrian American flag that I have passed on to my oldest son. He didn't do all that stuff so I can turn around and have some crazy loon with these far left socialist ideologies come in and destroy the whole thing. And you're nuts. I fought on the battlefield against this craziness, and you think I'm going to allow you to do it in Congress? Forget about it. It's not going to happen. So get me in, folks. I can at least be at the table to help you. If not, I at least I'm going to get in the fight, give it an opportunity. At least hopefully we can get some people to understand that they need to just get away from the dysfunction to help their own party.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, listen, a very Merry Christmas to you. Have a blessed one, Christmas, and really great seeing you again. And folks, this is thanks for joining us this evening, and thank you for being on. And this has been a great show. Really enjoyed it. So,
thank you, Debbie. One last thing, if I may, since you brought Christmas up, people know that I also set up the United Assyrian Appeal, which is a 501c3, and the money that we get, we help the military families of the Syrian Christians that helped fight against ISIS, but that also goes to other Christian refugees and throughout the Middle East. If most of it is concentrated in Iraq, of course. But if there's Christmas duration they can donate, it would be great. That's I'm sorry, United Assyrian Appeal, and that
United.
Would be,
say that again. United
Assyrian Appeal, and they could go to unitedassyrianappeal.org, and any bit helps. So with that said, God bless. Merry Christmas. Ida Chava Baricha in Aramaic, and let's hope that we can right the ship.
Absolutely. And in talking about the Christians, Christians are the most persecuted group now in the world. And it's really sad when we have seen so many Christians in Africa and other parts of the world being, massacred. And I think Nigeria, there was like a few months ago, 200. It's really sad, and there seems to be this movement, this atheist movement, or agnostic, but atheist, I think, movement that's moving through the West, and we need to get that right, that ship as well. We don't want to not only are Christians being persecuted, but we can't allow our churches to also fall apart. In a Western country like we are, uh, the churches here in the U.S. are really the, I guess, the shining light in the hill for the rest of the world, for Christians around the world, because Christians are really being persecuted.
Well, for me, I was in the Eisenhower building in the at the White House when the president signed the executive order giving guidance to the Department of Justice and Department of Treasury to allow the churches to have a more of a say in their politics. And I think we should support them. Look, atheism is a religion of believing in nothingness. I don't think the atheistic religions should supersede any other religion in our country. That being said, the POTUS has done his piece. We just got to make sure that we empower these institutions. He's going to an election in 2020. He wins. He'll be there for 4 more years. After that, I don't know who's going to come along that's going to be able to take some of the measures that he did when it came to supporting Israel, our strongest ally in the region in the Middle East, and the only ally I would probably say, given the fact that everybody else doesn't listen to us and works both sides of the aisle with the Russians and the Chinese and the Christians.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, once again, Merry Christmas. God bless. Get some rest. Get some
Thanks,
catch up
Hilda.
on some sleep. It's been
God
great
bless.
seeing you. God bless. And that's a wrap for tonight, folks. Take care until next time. Debbie Aldrich with Lieutenant Colonel retired Sargis Sangari. Saying it backwards. Anyway, until next time.